Muito bom dia. Bom dia. Bom dia a todos. You can understand. Bom dia a todos, inclusivamente a quem nos segue pelo canal YouTube do Tribunal de Contas e também um abraço especial para os nossos colegas que nos seguem nas secções regionais dos Açores e na Madeira. Eu tenho o grato prazer de apresentar o professor Soll, que é professor de História, Filosofia e Contabilidade na Universidade da Califórnia do Sul, não é? Do Sul da Califórnia. E o professor Soll, que tem, digamos, um currículo como professor e como investigador e como historiador imensamente muito conhecido em Portugal. É um amante de Portugal.
Sim.
Completamente. E fala imensas línguas, inclusive é português. Quer dizer, só um bocadinho. Mas o que diz em português nem tem accent, não tem, é como se fosse um português, não é?
Há muito tempo.
É verdade. E portanto, o professor Soll, que está digamos assim, num ciclo de conferências pela Europa e por outros países, está esta semana em Lisboa e manifestou a disponibilidade para aceder ao nosso convite para estar aqui no Tribunal de Contas, porque, além do mais, o professor Soll tem um livro, que é autor de um livro cujo título em português é Ajuste de Contas, podia ser Ajustamento de Contas, não é? Ajuste de Contas, de 2013, e que também se inspirou em muita documentação que nós temos aqui no Tribunal, não é? Portanto, é também um amante aqui do Tribunal de Contas, não é? E é autor de muitas outras obras, não é? Na área de História, de Filosofia, da Contabilidade, dos sistemas políticos, da democracia, da liberdade, da economia de mercado.
Sim.
Eu gostava depois que falasses um pouco sobre o conceito de free market.
Sim.
É uma coisa interessante. Portanto, faz uma ligação da contabilidade, da accounting, accountability, também com a democracia, com os sistemas políticos, com a história, com a evolução, enfim. Vamos gostar imenso de ouvir o professor Soll, a quem eu vou desde já dar a palavra, agradecendo mais uma vez a disponibilidade para estar aqui conosco, e não gostaria de terminar esta introdução sem agradecer também a presença do nosso presidente Vítor Caldeira, que também conhece o professor Soll desde há uns anos atrás, e que, portanto, temos muito gosto em tê-lo aqui mais uma vez connosco. Enfim, é uma casa que será sempre do presidente Vítor Caldeira. E, portanto, sem mais, agradecendo a presença de todos, dou a palavra ao professor Soll para a sua conferência. Eu vou ficar aqui ao lado do presidente Vítor Caldeira, que é para ver todos os slides. Ok?
Sim.
So, thank you very much
Muito obrigado.
Thank you.
Muito obrigado para todo. E desculpe-me de não falar português.
Muito bem.
I'm a little embarrassed to speak in English. Maybe
you want to speak here?
Maybe there. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, before COVID took away my Portuguese.
Yeah?
So this is.
You can see the
I
slides.
can see.
Okay.
I mean, I like to stand up, but.
What do you prefer? It's better. It's okay. It's okay like that.
You want me here? You prefer me here? Okay.
If you stay here, I will stay with you here.
Okay. Well, first, I mean, obrigadinhos to all these friends and all these people that I admire so much. Vitor, José, Luis, I mean, people that I've been working with for a really long time here in Portugal. And as we see in the Tribunal de Contas, an incredible history and quality of not only accounting, but public accounting in Portugal, and also the strength of institutions. I believe this is a key institution of democracy, which is something I still value a lot. Okay, so I like democracy. I'm coming from America. Not everybody does, but some of us still do. Okay, and I value Portuguese democracy, which is has been a good democracy. This book, so there's a new book that I've written with some colleagues called Public Net Worth. It's a book which I think today, as we were speaking earlier, I said I'm speaking to the convinced here, people who already know. But I do think it's important to repeat this message, and I think this message is very important for Portugal, because Portugal is always in this situation of almost kind of meeting its ambitions, but it's always quite difficult. And now we're entering into, I think, a period that will be incredibly challenging, a period where we will not have enough things, where, I mean, Portugal, just like California, where I live, will be suffering a lot from climate change. We'll be having growth issues, demographic issues. And so one of the things that became sort of clear to me and clear to my colleagues is that this is the point. There's no bad time to manage things well. But if we don't start managing things well, we will be in terrible trouble. And we're already seeing that in the United States or places in total crisis like Great Britain, in which public services, the once power of the world, is essentially in collapse. I mean, nothing works. It's they can't even launch a missile from a boat. This is Great Britain. And a lot of that has to do with public management. So this is, do I have to turn this on? I'm not good with technology. I can just do it.
It's okay.
Can do. So here is my Portuguese book. I like the cover. This is the best of all the covers because it's a good Portuguese cover. And this is my new book, which is connected, because one of the things that I believe is that markets are not, like the Americans say, these kind of natural things that work like the seasons. You need good management. You actually need good government. Otherwise, these markets don't work. And also, I've been working in South Korea. You also need strategy. You need good industrial strategy. And we're learning this now. No one wanted to admit it, but it works. And I'll talk about that as well. So today, what I want to do is sort of briefly talk about the main ideas of this book and why I believe Portugal absolutely must continue its reforms, its public accrual accounting reforms, and move towards a public balance sheet. And I want to explain why it's so difficult, but I want to explain also that Iberia has a long history of innovating, but not necessarily succeeding in bringing the innovations, this is typical, to fruition. And that one of my theories, and this is in my new book, why Britain became so wealthy, actually had to do with public financial management. And so this is, we always want to know why countries become wealthy, what makes countries successful. And I constantly say it has to do with accounting quality. And many people laugh, but people who know accounting don't laugh at all. They know this. But I also believe that what can make and break a nation is actually great public financial balance sheets. So what makes states succeed and fail? I believe governing via a public balance sheet, and I hope to make that case a little bit for you today. Portugal started really good reforms. How do I know this? Because I worked with Luis, and if you read Luis's books, okay, they're technical, but this is of a very high quality. So Portugal is actually leading in public financial management in many ways. And again, this is typical that things are happening in Portugal. People don't know the quality, and Portugal still hasn't taken advantage of the work. And I don't know if you want me to say this, but that you did in the ministry, which was very fine. And I had the privilege of actually visiting Luis in those days in the ministry and seeing it, and then seeing the books that he wrote. And at that time, I thought that Portugal would move forward in front of everybody because the tools were there. But Luis explained to me stories just like the stories I'm going to tell you, just how difficult this is to do politically for all sorts of reasons, good reasons, bad reasons. It's really quite hard. So again, In this book, maybe I can just show this book quickly. I didn't bring it because my bag was full and it's a heavy book. But this book that we've written, we also wrote under the kind of patronage of Martin Wolf of the Financial Times. And we just did a presentation with Martin Wolf. And it was impressive. He was so frustrated. I believe that in many ways, he is the greatest sort of overseer of sort of world finance, the sort of thinker, commentator. When we work with him, it's extraordinary, his level of culture, his moral compass. And he was furious. And you can see this on YouTube. I think it's on YouTube now, our conversation with him, just furious that these reforms have not been realized. And he was actually angry because of his concern about democracy and the falling of democracy right now. He also believes that this has to do with the use of accrual accounting and balance sheet in government. So the one country in the world that managed to do this, and it was by accident with our friend Ian Ball, it was a political accident that allowed them to create a national balance sheet, which by law, the government actually has to take into account when making any decisions. They actually accrue out on a national balance sheet every decision. Now, it's a small country, 4 million people. Its main product is sheep. So it's not a complex economy, but nonetheless, it is a remarkable model. And watching New Zealand go through crises with this balance sheet, for me, is enough to say, look at how they can handle crises with these balance sheets. It's a tool. It also does put a lot of pressure on the government, but I also think that it allows the government democratic credentials because everything it does is really public. So for those of you who don't know, one of the things that governments don't do really is talk about or measure not only their assets. I mean, governments don't always actually talk about their assets. They don't manage their assets. And so we could say in a private way, but for me, it's just in a good public way. I mean, I come from a family with a tradition of public service, also some industry and academe, but I do see this from a public service standpoint, that the managing the assets of the nation is absolutely key, and then being clear about the liabilities. Otherwise, I don't know what will happen. I mean, this is really a tough thing. And all countries now are suffering, maybe except Switzerland and Singapore, but those are countries with money flowing through in a very particular way, in which I won't always comment, which gives them a capacity to have a lot of cash. By the way, I don't completely believe in the Singapore miracle because it is a place with lots of dark money flowing through. There's amazing management as well, but it's not a great model. And the model I'm beginning to think is the best is actually South Korea. And because I was working there with the government, I was extremely impressed. When I first came to Portugal 35 years ago, South Korea was poorer than the Philippines. And now I will argue that it's probably the richest country in the world. And they don't like to be compared to Singapore because they have 52 million people. They do not have, let's say, shadow banking. They have to actually make their money. And they do it, and it's really tough. But it is a model, I think, for countries. And they have a big focus on higher education. I mean, the big focus, their elites stay. Some of them come to my university in America, but a lot of their elites stay in their main universities and stay in South Korea. So here's some of the work that we did in public net worth, showing the level of which countries have gotten where. Portugal, I believe, should be further along in its place in using accrual accounting, simply because it can, because actually the tools that it has and the advances that it has and the work that has been done here and in the ministry give it the possibility to be in a much better position than it is. And we could argue if this is totally correct. So, I mean, if we think about what it would mean to govern with a balance sheet, Portugal is a perfect example because Portugal is a country that lives in a lot of part from its nature, right? Everything from tourism to making cork to constantly improving wines. I mean, one thing I do want to say on record is that over the past few years, Portuguese wine has improved enormously. And I had some Douro wines, which were, but you have to think about the climate change and what this will mean for this absolute key thing for Portugal, because wines actually have a lot of value. But you talk about all these different things that when you govern by a balance sheet, the importance of looking at your country as a series of assets and possible liabilities is absolutely key. When you do this on a public balance sheet and you discuss it with your public, it is challenging because you will have lots of bad news for the public, but they will feel implicated. They'll be able to see. And I actually think it makes them feel more like stakeholders because they can see not only what the public owns, but how the government's managing it. And if the government does a good job, I think it can make a democratic case for itself without being populist or demagogue. I could put this slide for almost any country now, okay? These are the problems we're facing. I'm increasingly worried about the United States, about democracy, but also about climate change denial, living in California like I do, but also seeing Portugal, the changes in Portugal forests. I spent a lot of time in them. Worry me a lot, and the water levels, and also you can always measure things by olive trees because they're so old, and olive production, and watching the olive production crisis in Spain is literally terrifying. I mean, people should be really concerned. So there's going to need to be better management. There is only one way for this better management via governments, and that is, again, through this balance sheet, a government-wide, consolidated, coordinated financial statement. And this is something that Portugal could do. There are always excuses, and every party makes them. And many politicians who make those excuses are friends of mine who do a good job, that care about democracy. But this is always a hard thing to do because the public doesn't understand it. And Luis once explained to me the challenges, which maybe I won't talk about in public, but they're really serious. And they're the same challenges we faced hundreds of years ago of governments either not wanting things to be too transparent, or when you make things transparent and show that there are assets, the government comes quickly for them. So it's extremely challenging, but absolutely necessary. Portugal's doing better, but we know that it still doesn't have the industrial base that it's going to need to compete. So it's going to have to, and it's going to have an aging population. Everything's being rebuilt here, but the government is going to have to manage everything better, and I keep saying that. But this gets back to this bigger question that I always ask: why do some countries get rich, and why do some countries not get rich? Or like Portugal's had one of the more unusual histories, obviously, in the world of getting rich very quickly early on in, I don't know, this early moment of capitalism and colonialism, and then to lose a lot of that wealth quickly. It has a very unusual history. Some of this history has been underestimated because Portugal has always managed to kind of still be rich and also have moments of innovation. It's very unusual. And the world doesn't really know this history. And I think Portugal is again in this position right now. It's actually doing pretty well compared to a lot of countries. But this is the key moment of decision where I think it will have to actually make some hard decisions. I wanted to talk historically because one of the great stories or narratives in the history of capitalism is the failure of Iberia and the success of Great Britain. I believe that this story is not totally correct. It is correct in some ways, but also in my new book, Free Market, I show how France, with great disadvantage, actually was competing and going alongside England, and actually they grew symbiotically together. So the idea of England winning is actually a false narrative. But there's something else that happened in Iberia, and that's what I was talking about, is that there were great innovations made in Iberia. And right now, many historians are showing how innovative Iberia was in the time of early capitalism and imperial capitalism, with all the problems with slavery, with colonialism. But nonetheless, this was also a period of vast innovation, as we saw with that box today. Those are actually extremely high-tech things, those boxes, these safety boxes. Philip II is a key figure because I actually blame him a lot for the collapse of Iberian power because of his disdain for accounting. But he's a super interesting guy, and so obviously was Charles V, because they were constantly in debt. Empire is not a great way, actually, for long-term wealth. And so what happens is this empire, as you know, has huge amounts of gold coming in the boxes, but it also costs money. So Spain and for a while Portugal together are constantly bankrupt, okay? And we know these sort of stories, and we know some of the reasons that Spain goes bankrupt. There are lots of bad, well, this one maybe was a necessary decision, but much of the wealth of Spain and Portugal is actually going through Holland. Why? Because they're the greatest financial managers. What happens here in Iberia is an awareness that that's a problem, an awareness of bankruptcy, and an awareness that Flanders and the Netherlands are controlling the wealth of Iberia. And within Philip II's administration, there is this moment where there is a decision to make accounting reforms. They are the most sophisticated public accounting reforms I've seen before the 18th century. And actually in Au Juste de Comptes, I have some citations that are absolutely incredible, and you can go back and look in the books because these sources are published, of the public laws for balance sheet reform in the 16th century. So they actually convinced Philip that he needs a national balance sheet. And this was really great because my co-authors are extremely skilled accountants. They were able to work with me to look at the Spanish accounts and to say they think that Spain created the first integrated balance sheet, large scale, that we've ever seen, which is a huge thing. It's not anywhere in history. It's mentioned in this book. No one will care because it's accounting history, but I think you know that's a huge achievement. Okay, so they actually do it. Okay, so Spain is in debt. Philip II hates accounting because there is a particularly Catholic aristocratic attitude that accounting is dirty. And this emerges, and I tell this history, really after the 1400s only. Only in the 1500s does this new attitude that the merchant arts are somehow make your hands dirty, as Philip II himself said, that you should never touch account books, becomes a huge problem in European governmental culture, that aristocrats don't touch account books. Only in England, and that's a whole particular culture that has to do with Francis Bacon. But what happens is Juan de Ovando comes in, and he is the one that actually understands. He's an inquisitor, and he understands a lot of his work is literally just auditing, but he understands what a comprehensive balance sheet is, and that it is the only way out for Spain with its debt and its global challenges. You have to understand, no one had ever seen this before in human history. So this is an incredible thing. I myself didn't understand the significance of what he did until my co-authors actually went through the books and said, my God, this is an integrated balance sheet, a comprehensive balance sheet. So I had written about him, but I didn't realize it. By the way, Spain had very few people that knew double entry accounting, and the Libro de Caixa comes in very late. Most of the people who knew were working in various metal industries, or they were in Andalusia, where the boats were coming in, working in the Casa de Contratación. But the government itself struggled to find 3 people that could do accrual accounting, which is always a fascinating challenge. The Armada kind of is the nail in the coffin of Spain's financial possibilities. If you actually account it, it's a disaster from financial terms, let alone from political terms. So at this point, Philip is convinced he's ruined, and they convince him that he has to create this balance sheet. He does it. It takes decades. They don't fully get it until it's something like 1623 or 4. They actually have the fully functioning modern balance sheet, and they don't use it. By the way, once Philip gets the tools, he doesn't use it. He uses it to start actually auditing his high nobles. And so this is this kind of problem that we constantly have. And I'm looking at Luis because I feel like he's lived this history where you can take a country very far in its tools of management and then have them undermined by political or even social realities and things. And it's extremely hard to make even the greatest reforms stick. And watching Philip II create these reforms and then ruin them is one of the more, I would say, historically relevant stories that I've ever heard, because he gets farther than anyone and then he takes it down. And then when he's dead in the 17th century, Spain has the tools and they're just forgotten in a room. It's absolutely incredible. In fact, I wonder where those archives are. And it would be amazing if, actually it'd be good to talk to their Tribunal de Comptes and to show the first comprehensive balance sheet in the world, because Spain has it. That would be an amazing thing to do. Also, at this time, Spain is Portugal. So the question is, what's the relation to Portugal in all this? I wanted to say the accounting history of Portugal and Spain at various times has really still, there's been some really good work, but much more needs to be done. And it would explain a lot in the history of the state and the history of the successes and failures. Now, this brings me just briefly to the Marquês de Pombal. He actually does try. There are a number of countries in around 1720 that start trying to create a national balance sheet. And they actually, many of them succeed. The Marquês de Pombal is, of course, one of the most successful. And it's the Marquês de Lavradio who pushes this, but also with colonial organization. There's evidence of extremely high levels of public financial management in Portugal, which explains a lot. It doesn't stick as usual, but I think this is history that people have to actually look into. And I wonder if it's not in the Tribunal de Contas that some of this work could be done to understand the Portuguese state, the Portuguese successes, and really to once again make, I think, a better case for Portuguese modernity under the Marquês de Pombal, which reached an extremely high level. And that, I think, would not only be good for Portugal's place in the world, but also to understand and make the case for governance in Portugal today. To say, look, Portugal in a certain way, under the Marquês de Pombal, was further along than we are in certain ways. And there's a national historical narrative that we could tell of why we should make a renaissance of this Portuguese Enlightenment. But I wanted to just follow with this work that I'm doing now on this new book that I'm doing, which is about virtue, but accounting plays a huge role. And this idea of debt, which is constant, which we all live in. And the idea of a country, there are all these arguments. Should countries have debt? Obviously, it's better not to have debt. But you know, Great Britain has had debt forever. And one of the things I argue as a historian is it's not necessarily the debt, it's how well you manage it. Now, obviously, we saw England under, I don't even remember her name, the prime minister of a few days, basically destroying Britain very, very quickly. Britain had too much debt. It couldn't actually do 40 billion in tax cuts. It just didn't actually have the money. The markets reacted, and there wasn't, they threw away the books of their public accountants. They ignored them. And this shows that debt is a problem if you don't manage it well. And right now, England is really in a bad situation with debt. There was an attempt in the 18th century to manage debt privately with all these schemes, and these are the bubbles. But these bubbles are very important because what happens around them is financial literacy, particularly in England, is that you get the birth of this financial revolution in England where you have people who are stock jobbers who start understanding accounting. You start having people in parliament who start understanding accounting. this is an incredible image. This is the image of the crisis. I don't know if you can see, but if you look here, these are double entry account books being rolled over by folly. They understood so well what a financial crisis was. It wasn't just a bubble. It was madness and rolling over your account books. And that showed their understanding of the crisis that they were in. And there are many representations of this. After the crisis of the Mississippi bubble in France and of the South Sea Company in Britain, you have accountants that arrive because both countries have terrible debt. And it's only when the debt gets terrible that they call in the accountants. We always know that, right? This is the time when I worked on the Greek debt crisis, I'll show you. And when the Greeks got with their back to the wall, they called in the accountants, and we were able to actually do incredible reforms. And Luis also was involved with that. And I'll show you some of that. But they call these financiers the Paris, the Frères Paris. And this is Claude Paris-Lamontagne. He writes the most extraordinary treatise, which no one's ever read. I read it twice. It's not an easy read, 700-page manuscript on why all governments should be governed by an accrual comprehensive balance sheet. This is written in like 1726 or 1722. I mean, we've gone so far backwards that this book comes out now. Experts are interested in it, but these books were being written, okay, in Spain and Portugal in the 16th century and France at the beginning of the 18th century. I mean, books of a sophistication that, again, as I'm not a trained accountant, I'm a historian, I can't even fully understand them. Only a forensic accountant can actually understand these books because they're sophisticated. But France fails. Why? It's an absolute monarchy, and the king's brothers, this is a problem throughout the entire 18th century. The king's brothers get a huge amount of money from the public purse, and they don't want anyone to know this. This goes all the way to the French Revolution, which I could even make an argument. The king's brothers' resistance to accounting is one of the things that causes the French Revolution. So elites come in the government, and they have the most remarkable reforms set out, just like the Spanish and the Portuguese, and they destroy them. And they get rid of their national bank. They get rid of everything, their currency, and they get rid of accounting in the state. And if you study the French 18th century via accounting, which in Au Juste de Compte I did briefly, you see the history of the French Revolution as a history of accounting failure. And people know it because the French Revolution, 30% of all the pamphlets written in the French Revolution were about accounting and accounting reform. Nobody knew that either because who cares, right? It's accounting. Well, it turns out it's very important. But Britain has a different story. Britain's elite, the first prime minister, very corrupt, but his father in their country house had a collection of books by Francis Bacon. So they were studying the scientific method, but Francis Bacon believed that accounting was a key part of the scientific method in daily life. So he learns accounting as a child with his father, a nobleman. Now, this is unusual already. And this I'm starting to think is what gives England its advantage. He bails out the South Sea Company, not only giving 50% back for each stock, but he creates a sinking fund and actually creates management balance sheets within the state. This is an Irish member of parliament who starts arguing. He's an accountant, and he starts bringing balance sheets to Parliament and showing them in Parliament. This is a great historical moment, and here is his computations of public debts done with accrual. He also does it with the South Sea Company to show that the company is broke. But this is what's being discussed on the floor of Parliament. And just for the record, when the crisis in 2007 and 8 happened, I was first studying this many years ago, and I believe that in America, they would go with the Lehman Brothers account books into Congress. I mean, little did I know. Also, I didn't realize the bad state of American politics. I mean, really a bad state. But I expected the account books to be put on the table in the Parliament, like in the 18th century in Britain. It didn't happen. But this is one of the most important things in the history of modern government, but also in public finance. What you had in 18th century England was something that Spain and Portugal did not have. It was a public, very literate in accounting. By the time we get to the 1760s, 1720, 1706, there's something like 40 accounting schools. By the time we get to 1780, there are more than 1,000 accounting schools in Great Britain. The literacy is everywhere. It is remarkable. So accounting literacy is extremely important. But so is the mixture, and I've said this over and over again, of the people who do accounting, and you see it here in Portugal more than most places, a literacy with culture, history, literature, poetry, the capacity to do public speaking. You need accountant leaders who in their country can speak the language of their country, of history, of culture, to make the case and show why accounting is so important in the terms that people understand, whether they be elites, whether they be normal people in the street. And for that, you need this. And this is what 18th century Britain gets. And here we start seeing this is colonial accounting art, but we see also the entrance of accounting into art. That's why I was so shocked by the painting you have. There's no modern accounting painting. That's the first modern accounting painting, a good one that's sophisticated, that I've ever seen anywhere in the world. Absolutely fascinating. I need a better picture of it because I want to put it into my slideshows. So I need that picture because it's completely unusual. But I want to just sum up with this guy who's the sort of hero of my new book. Richard Price is a radical, a low church dissenting Protestant, completely believes in a connection of total radical democracy and revolution through Christianity. He's connected with Benjamin Franklin. He's a defender of Philadelphia and the freedom of America early on. And he is part of a group of dissenting Protestants that believe that God actually, this comes from Newtonianism, that God shows himself through natural phenomena. And one way of understanding God, this is what the dissenters would do, was they would do scientific experiments themselves as a religious practice. Now, this is something that the old elite used to do. And I'm sad today when I see elite people no longer collecting shells, doing geology. There was a time when our grandfathers all were natural scientists as their hobby. I think this was absolutely key in creating wealth. And if you come from an older family, you have a cabinet of natural curiosities or historical curiosities. This is all gone because all anybody does now is this. And I don't think that's always so helpful, right? But what he starts doing is he believes that God is in the numbers, which is a Newtonian concept. And he is writing books on morality, so writing books on virtue and connecting virtue to accounting. He also is the modern father of the actuarial sciences, but also of a very high level of public accounting. And he's seen, many people don't like him because he's in the low church. He's not an Anglican. And he is called as an insult that able calculator. But what he starts doing is he also starts calculating the national debt. And he writes these incredible books filled with balance sheets. But he writes this book, there's 2 tracts on civil liberty, which I consider to be the sort of unrecognized great book of political modernity, because he writes a tract on civil liberty. And the first half of the book is on what positive liberty and freedom and constitutionalism and the rule of law look like. And he does this with arguments from Christianity, arguments from ancient Rome. But then the second half of the book, this is incredible, and this had never been done before. So this is a tract on civil liberty, which is a reference to John Locke, okay? The second half of the book is balance sheets. No one had ever done this before, to write a modern book on civil liberties and modern government and democracy, because he will go on to support the French Revolution, which is a very radical thing to do, okay? I mean, he's considered a radical. But what happens is Pitt brings him into the government, which is crazy. He brings the radical into the government, and he goes through the government accounts in 1781 where England is and France are once again bankrupt because of the war in America, he creates a sinking fund with this basic accounting understanding that you have to attack the principal of your debt to bring your payments down so that you can afford them. And because he doesn't believe in taxes, he creates a lottery. And from the money of the lottery, he actually breaks down the principal of the debt to lower the payments, which saves the political situation and also allows England to work its way out. I don't agree with everything this guy said. He was a bit of a nut, and today he would probably be, perhaps, I don't know, living in Kentucky. But actually, no, because he was so educated that I don't think that he would. Unbelievable sophistication, radical sophistication. But I believe that he is a model for understanding modern democratic government and understanding the absolutely central role that management, through a comprehensive balance sheet, but also through basic accrual accounting reforms, he saves England. 1781 is really the year that the English economy takes off. That is also because of the Industrial Revolution, but it's also because that is where it goes beyond France. The French do not have these tools of public accounting. I'm literally making an argument that the country that does this and does this well, a place like Portugal, which is kind of floating right now, it has had some successes. It really has. I mean, compared to where we were 10 years ago, we've had some successes, but it still has a weak foundation. And it also is facing the challenges that everybody else is facing. If Portugal were to do this now, it would give it this advantage, which is not an advantage. You don't need 120 billion in investment. Well, you could use 120 billion in investment, which Japan just got just for like several chip factories. I've been working in East Asia the past few years. I mean, I'm sorry to say, that's the future. The Koreans took me to their suburbs on a speed train. The suburban speed train just went by chip factory after chip factory. And you know that the GDP per capita in South Korea is not that much higher than here, but it will get higher. So I was brought in to make the argument to them. They are looking at these reforms. And I think the Koreans, I think we're close to getting this in Korea. Imagine Korea with the chip factories and the comprehensive balance sheet. The problem is they have a lot of trouble with their neighbors. They're not the neighbors that you want. And, you know, soon if things go badly, we could also have bad neighbors here too in Portugal, if things keep going the way they're going. But so this is a plea for Portugal to take this advantage, to continue the reforms that it was making. It's a hard process, but it's a process I just want to show you. Sorry. Portugal has an accounting elite that has social prestige, that has cultural knowledge, and can speak not only to politicians, but to the leaders of Portugal. Most countries do not have what you have here in the Tribunal de Contas and my friends here. This does not exist, this kind of high level of leaders of accounting. This is the time to make the case. Whether it works, this is always historically hard. But I do think this is really the time to take the risk, because Luis also explained to me once the risks of even proposing these reforms. Very sophisticated analysis. I just want you to know, I learned a lot from him. I remember us in the ministry, you sitting explaining to me with your eyes wide open how hard this job was. Think about this. By the way, you will get support from the commission. I've been working with them, and I worked a lot with Manfred Kraft. He's gone. That's a loss. But the commission will still help you do this. Worked a lot in Greece. We got Greece to do the reforms. Luis, you're in this picture, aren't you? Yeah, you were there. We see him? There he is. Yeah. I got the communists to do this. Okay? That means you can do it. Okay? That means you can do it. You know, he doesn't get credit for this, but he's the one that did this. We got the parliament to take this up. They were desperate, but it was this guy, Franciscus Koutentakis, my dear friend, who was a communist, and now he moves more to the center. who really understood that these reforms would work. And he pushed them and he pushed them, and they had remarkable success. And now with Kyriakos in government, Kyriakos kept people with this. He did not undermine the reforms at all. He kept the reforms going. This has been a huge advantage for Greece. Greece had no internal reporting. Now it has good internal reporting. Greece still has a lot of problems. I actually believe Portugal has more possibility than Greece. But Greece was like New Zealand in the idea that it had this moment where you were able to do some of these reforms. Not everyone will have, you don't want your back to the wall, right? You need to make the reforms now. And that is something that I believe Portugal has to do. So I'm now working with the Korean government. And believe me, if there's any proof that this is the future, it's the fact that the Koreans are doing it, because their dynamism literally will leave you, I mean, like that, because it's incredible. It also is a society that does not have the pleasures of Portuguese society because it's so rough, because it's so competitive. But this is the case. If they're doing it, and they're doing it, they believe in this culture of accountability, and the people around the president want these reforms done and are trying. And I think we're making some progress there, getting very close. So this is to show you, I think Portugal should follow and maybe lead with South Korea. Do this now. It also is a great way, by the way, creditors like it, investors love it, and the Financial Times, I can guarantee, will do an article on it now because Martin Wolf is interested again. So this is a great possibility for any new Portuguese government to look good internationally, attract money, and get positive press. And I always end with this image. I mean, a little bit like our friend José is the accountant leader, a person of culture, a person of style and education, and with some profundity, who sees the importance and the prestige of accounting and can make that case to their country. Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much, Professor Jacob Soll. Jacob is our friend. You know a lot of history of Portugal.
I've been living in Portugal since I was 21. I love this country with a deep passion. I owe this country, in some ways, my life, because I had my real education here. And this has a special culture, this country. I mean, and I say savoir-vivre, a knowledge of living, but a knowledge of humanity and relations that the world envies today because people come to Portugal for this. I want to see Portugal not only succeed, but also in a long Portuguese tradition to retain many of the old ways, which in Portugal is not necessarily reactionary. Okay? This is my belief in Portuguese culture, that people think it's reactionary. No. Portugal is an unusually open country. So I want to preserve Portugal not in some far right way, not in a reactionary, but I think maybe in a progressive way, to retain the way of Portuguese living, which changed my entire life and brought me more joy and happiness than I can tell you.
Thank you for sharing us your ideas. You have a lot of ideas, very, very good for us. And if you allow me, I would like, as a good student who is here in the professor. I have as in the university. I like always at the end of the classes in the university to have a summary of the class of the professor, and I have wrote here.
It's very French, très français.
First, I have appreciated very much your last sentence when you said a comprehensive balance sheet and an accountable state. This is a very strong title to a book for your next book.
Well, this was kind of
Maybe we will disseminate your conference with this type.
Yeah.
Maybe the conference, is a good type.
Yeah.
But I have wrote here, management with correct and comprehensive and complete accounting, so with assets, liabilities, and so on, is a fundamental basis to trust and confidence, and also to development, and to the capacity to face crises, taking into account the deficits and the debt and so on. Above all, in a global world with more or less free market.
Freedom, right.
Freedom. With a lot of investments and so on. With this sense, countries or states have high possibilities to succeed and not to fail. And we cannot forget lessons learned from history.
Absolutely.
You are an historian.
Yeah.
Do you agree with this conclusion?
Absolutely. And even more, I'd say that going back into history shows even the path of making the reforms and the payoff. And it's also a national discourse, a discourse that shows you as part of your history, you can be proud of it.
Yeah. It's okay. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, you are available to
Of course.
if it is the case.
This is not Russia yet.
Muito bem. Não sei se alguém gostaria de fazer alguma pergunta ao professor Jacob Soll, aproveitando a sua conferência. Foi muito clara, não é? Mas de qualquer modo. Uma. Não.
Acha que ponha a questão em português
Sim,
ou em
inglês?
Em inglês?
Faz favor. Talvez, não se importa de pôr. Tem aí o. Faz favor.
Because a doubt arises in my mind, hearing to you very attentively. There is a trend nowadays in supreme audit institutions, in court of auditors like ours, and similar institutions like GAO in the United States, to diversify our audit tasks. So, what we hear in international arenas is that we should do more performance audits and less financial audits and less performance audit and less compliance audits. And we should not give so much attention to the rendering of accounts and pay more attention to landscape reviews or transversal studies. Listening to you very carefully and being also of your opinions that an accrual accountancy and a balance sheet is key for a good governance. What do you think of this? Do you think we should do it, or we should keep a balance between the financial control of the accounts? That's what we do here in the court. We have the balance. But I should like to hear your opinion. Thank you.
First, you have to make sure that the accounts that you're auditing are accrual. That's the hardest part. I mean, so in America, much of our public accounting is not even accrual. So the idea that you're going to move beyond it is, I'm sorry, not a good idea. First, just get the accounts. And the only way to do that is by accounting standards and then by audits that will make sure those standards are held. It does have to start financially. At the same time, all these other audits are important. But I always say, because I also believe, and we were talking about this in Korea, if people want to take into account ESG, which I also can give you a long speech that people have been doing, accounting actually comes out of moral good government, even in Holland, even ecological frameworks. It's a long history. It's not anything new. You can do that actually on another balance sheet too. Because you still need, because any good accountant will say, no, you can't put all that on the balance sheet. It has to be purely financial. That's a good argument. It's so hard just to do that. I say, start there, please. Just start with your accrual balance sheets and your good audits of your accrual balance sheets. Then you can move on to all these other performance things. And if you want another set of measures, I think you can do it. What the Koreans were thinking, as we discussed it, was to create different kinds of now balance sheets, as you're basically talking about, for the government. But that financial sheet is the key centerpiece. And without that being of high quality, forget it. And that's the message of the comprehensive balance sheet. And we know we're not there yet. So I say, yes, start on all the other measures, but make sure that you first get this balance sheet going. The one thing I do say is when I give speeches around the world, when we start talking about ESG balance sheets, for example, with climate stuff, you get young people much more interested in balance sheets with that. So I actually recommend doing that. There's a narrative and a personal quality to those sheets that people can understand. But the professional accountants will say, I can't really measure that well, so that we can't do that. If the accountant stops there and says, we can't do it, everyone will stop listening. So you have to say, sure, we can do that. We might need a different balance sheet for that. And so we talked in the Korean government about that. And there was an agreement in Korea that would work better for them. And they also agreed that the Korean public, for example, was very, very not interested at all in financial balance sheets, very interested in ecological balance sheets, as everybody should be. How to do that is the question, but it can be done. But there obviously start with your good accrual comprehensive balance sheets, and then actually you can start working in, and we're already seeing this, you start working in the ecological stuff in there, and the resistance to it, and the faking of things, and the trading of carbon, which is totally absurd. But anyway, yes.
Thank you very much. Jacob, can we have good management with bad accounting?
Look, anybody that has a family company will say to you at a certain point, I can do some of this with cash accounting. But even in 1375, businessmen in Tuscany were saying, why on earth would you do cash accounting? The pharmacist across the street in Prato, in Tuscany, he's doing cash accounting. I'm doing double entry accounting, and there is no comparison. So no, at the end of the day, you can do it for a while. And I've had people come up to me and say, look, I make money and I do it with cash accounting. Sure, good for you, but it doesn't work as well. It just doesn't. History shows it over and over again. It's one of the only inventions that we haven't really truly improved upon. In fact, we have a hard time harnessing it because it remains remarkably hard to pin down. No, accrual accounting is accrual accounting. And look, there's a reason that Germany, the Länder in Germany, have the best accrual accounting, but that the German state uses cash accounting. And I wrote an article about this. Do I have this here in the New York Times? This is all, wait, no, that's another article I wrote. I wrote an article about the Germans. The Germans don't, they use cash accounting so that they can misrepresent their debt. What does it do to show that you have no debt? Well, it gets you loans at lower interest rates. It allows you to undermine Italy and France's building industries by actually borrowing money at a low interest rate and then actually undercutting them in bidding for building contracts. I figured out this. A lot of people know this. But Germany now is having all these problems, and the government still uses cash accounting. And no, this is a bad thing. Look, anybody here, would you run a medium-scale serious business with cash accounting over accrual accounting? Well, it's not legal, is it? It's not legal. Mm-hmm. No, you can't. So the idea that we wouldn't do it in the government is a purely political issue.
President Vitor Caldera.
No, a very brief comment. First, to thank you very much for your conference this morning, and very helpful. And it reminds me that when I arrived to the Portuguese Tribunal de Contas in 2016, a major issue for the whole court was how to certify the accounts according to the new law from 2015. And I use your table from OECD from 2016, where we are, and I would say that probably we have not progressed very much in 8 years. And the proof of that is that this institution is not yet issued, or will next year probably issue an opinion on the 2023 account. 26 is pushed over again. So you see where we are. 8 years not possible, and more 2 years to go. And this is clearly political will. If you don't have strong will in those running the public accounts to move for transparency and then to be accountable, those who have to audit the accounts can do very little. And so our recommendations in the court, from the Tribunal de Contas, are the same for the past 15 years. And it is not moving. And one of the major issues is that there are assets that cannot be measured accurately. I remember the discussions, how we value forests, how we value public heritage buildings, etc. And when we arrive there, we stop and we do nothing. And that's probably where this tribunal has done a huge effort and continues to do. But unfortunately, without the political will, we are stuck. And your message today, I think, is very clear. And the synthesis made by President José Tavares is very nice. And I wish that tomorrow one of the Portuguese media picks it up and rise the bells again. Thank you for your conference.
I have a question, though. I mean, what do you... So, when I was in Korea, what their accounting association did media blitzes with me, one paper after the next, lots of business papers, but then the main paper, trying to get this message across so that the president's financial advisor would read it. And then from all angles, we set it up to try and sort of sell it via the press. And I think we kind of succeeded. But there were lots of people involved with that, which was very interesting. Do you think that there's a similar pathway here? Because it's hard for me to understand, given the financial limitations that Portugal has, why it wouldn't be used. And also, I feel like you need to be a good politician to do this, but against rising populism, a good politician could use this as a weapon against populists. But you need to be skilled to do it. That's the problem. You need to be skilled, but if you're not skilled, the populists are going to beat you anyway. I mean, this is the problem. But so do you see a way? I mean, to be honest, this is the great antidote to populism, because this is the accounts. This is like the reality of the situation. People can argue that, but at a certain point, it is very much a reality. This is where you can't be populist, which is why don't have the biggest voice. Do you think there's a strategy here that's possible in Portugal to push these reforms, or is it just an incredibly difficult situation? I know, Luis.
Thank you, Jake, for your masterclass, and I agree with all the comments. Of course, we need several stakeholders involved in this kind of reforms, and one of them is for sure the press. You said one thing, that we have to discuss upon the reality, and when we are talking about accounting, it's how we construct the reality and how we communicate the reality. Maybe also the Court of Auditors has a role in these reforms, in promoting these reforms and now into reforms. But as the President Vitor Caldeira said, this is mainly a political issue. So the court will audit after the Minister of Finance prepare the accounts, the consolidated accounts, and to certify accounts, you need first to have the accounts. So there is two different roles: the preparers and the auditors. And if nobody prepares the accounts, we cannot audit the accounts. My colleague here is the, let's say, the responsible for this type of auditing. So my question is, what can we do to make the Minister of Finance to prepare the accounts first?
Doesn't the EU require you to do it?
No, because you, as you mentioned, Germany is cash-based. So without Germany on board, it's at EU level, I think it's almost impossible.
And that's not going to happen anytime soon.
So this needs to be an internal need. So Portugal wants to, like President said, Portugal wants to manage well public resources, and for that we need good accounting, accrual accounting, complete the comprehensive balance sheet.
Is it so threatening? I mean, I study politics and I have many friends who are heads of state, but I actually, with them, it's been very hard, the heads of state, to get them, because they have so many concerns that this seems like a kind of self-wound to them. And if you're working with the prime minister of a country, so many things are happening at them. To stop and to open the books and they don't know what they'll find, that is just, it's almost impossible to ask that. And I see that as the problem, because I've tried, I've done it. The Greeks didn't have a choice, right? But I still wonder if a team that already has a certain level of the accounts and maybe has some good news can go and make this case. I don't know. I mean, I really think about it in political terms, that a team goes to the president almost in a capacity that's nobody, it's not well known to the public, and says, look, you have this incredible possibility, this tool, which right now might be incredibly useful to you. You've said it can always go both ways, but I almost feel like it's a necessary mission. And with a new government, there's so many considerations, and they're just getting into the books. I don't know, but it always seems worth trying to me. But I see the problem. I mean, it seems really bad to me, really challenging.
We have the laws, the basis to.
Yes.
We need to.
That's right.
Put in practice,
Yeah, but
it's a kind of decoupling,
Yeah, I know. But there's also the will. I still think some kind of, I would say, dynamic thinking to sell this to a government. That's, again, and I'm talking about the Koreans because I was fascinated. They said, we're trying to sell this to the president. It was incredible. And it was a huge campaign. It was exhausting. It was, 12 hours a day. And although we ate some very good food, and the lunches were impressive, and the dinners were impressive. But the point, although the hard alcohol really hurt me, I'm still very damaged from this. I'm taking these medicines from soju. I have to take this now. But the point is that I don't know. I think that Korean way really impressed me. They got everyone together of every accounting association. If you look at these pictures, these were like everybody, top economists, everyone. They got everyone together to make a press towards the government. So if you actually know who all of these people are, it's an incredibly unusual group of people. The most famous economist in the country, government ministers, people from the private sector, all together to make the case to the president's office, because it was only going to come from there. I thought it was like very, very smart. I don't know if it's possible. I don't know if it's a good idea here, because it's always different, but this is what they did. And that's why I wanted to give you this example, because I was really impressed and shocked, because this is what historically might work, but every country and every situation is different.
all together towards a comprehensive balance.
That's right. But by the way, having your top economist on board was really, really important, because the top people listen to economists and not accountants. And he was hilarious because he was a super interesting guy who was a, I'd say center right-wing economist, but very opposed to privatization schemes. He said, so 80s and 90s. Very much of a free thinker, but the kind of guy that the government ends up listening to these economists most. They found a good economist, a smart economist who completely understood the importance of accounting. And I could see the way we were seated, that every accounting person would go, and then the final comment would go to the economist. So that would go off like that, the way it was delivered. I was like, that's really smart.
Thank you very much, Jack. Sim. O nosso Telmo Marcos Mendes, audit director of the certification of accounts.
Wow.
Yeah, so thank you very much for your conference.
Department, okay.
Yeah, it was very interesting. I'm Telmo. I'm the audit director of the department who has the responsibility to certificate the accrual accountants of the state. And I would like to add one or two ideas. And the first one is that the Portuguese Court of Auditors is not waiting for the consolidated accounts of the state. We are working hard to push harder the government and the parliament. Yes, because we have made several audits in the last 3 years, including audits to the information systems, to the consolidation process, and we are always telling to government with our audit observations that they have to do more and faster. And we also are we issue some landscape reviews. And the point is that there are several issues. The political decision is key, of course, but the Portuguese Court of Auditors is part of the process of evolution. Okay, so then that's it. Thank you.
So wait, how do you see a strategy for moving things forward? Because you're really like there.
Well, many sectors of the government are doing some real efforts. We observe it in our audits. But we have now perhaps a review of the budget law. So we have to wait to see where they actually want to go. We should have this account, 2023 account, certified. And last year, we made an audit and we told the government, forget it, 2023, it won't be the account to be consolidated because you have no conditions. Your consolidation efforts are not enough. So we have to do more than that. Okay.
And do they have what's their react?
The react, it was to recognize that 2023, it won't be the year, and they are expecting more funds to develop their information systems, their accountability systems, and they push forward to 2026 accounts. But we don't believe with this pace in 2026, we won't have the conditions to have a consolidated financial statements. So I think there is a huge role to the Portuguese Court of Auditors to pressure the government and to inform the citizens that the government has to move better and faster. So 2026 won't be the year of consolidated accountants.
So here's
Accounts.
here's a question, because what you say to me is really interesting, but to the public wouldn't necessarily understand it. Up until 2014, the Financial Times had an accounting journalist named Adam Smith. And Adam Smith, by the way, the real one, wasn't very good with governments, and according to me, didn't understand modern economies, but that's another story and another book that I just wrote. But the idea is, do you think this is the kind of ambition and the kind of dynamism that I think works historically? And also in Korea, I've seen this happening and working, is having someone that writes a chronicle of the state accounts, but with almost funny stories. And so that the public gets connected to this in Expresso or O Público. And to have this kind of chronicle dos contos de Portugal with these kind of good stories, with funny stories, but to use this sort of tradition to connect the public to this, to put pressure, someone who maybe is no longer a public servant, but can write with freedom and with experience and maybe some anonymous connections, to write this thing in the Portuguese tradition with some humor to connect the public and pressure the government. I mean, I literally think this is the kind of thing that has to happen. And since you have some years before it's going to happen, this is the kind of thing, the way you have to think, to use culture in order to get this. There's no other way to do it. The public won't get it on its own. They just don't know about this. So I don't know if it's possible. We made a pitch to Martin Wolf to try and get an accounting journalist back at the Financial Times. And we're still working on that. I made a pitch to Bloomberg to do it. They had a lower guy, but then he sent out some guy to attack my new book. And Bloomberg is less interesting than he looks in person. And his news organization is less sophisticated than it would look. But Portugal is one of the last countries, and Lisbon, with a full press ecosystem. You have press like people had 30 years ago, and people read it. The rest of the world doesn't have as many high quality publications as this city has. Did you know that Portugal has a sophisticated reading public of 30,000 people? That's the same as the United States. I mean, yeah, it's, if you talk to your editors here. So I believe that you have the possibility within your press ecosystem and the talents and the writing traditions and the connection that the Portuguese reading public still has to do this kind of thing. I mean, my friend Diogo Ramada Curto, who's the director of the Biblioteca Nacional, writes about books and all these things at a very high level across the Portuguese press in a way that's no longer possible in other countries. I believe that you could do this financially in a sophisticated literary way, and that might have an impact. And I don't see why you wouldn't do it. That's all I can say. If I could write in Portuguese, and I knew the situation was here, I would ask someone to give me the chronicle. As long as I could go out to lunch every day in Lisbon and talk to everybody, and seriously, then you would have lots of stories to tell. No, that's not a joke.
Thank you. Thank you. Before concluding the session, I would like to put you a personal question, if you allow me. So you are a professor of philosophy, of history, and also accounting.
History, accounting.
Accounting, history. Yes. But why have you chosen accounting to study it, and have you a special reason for that?
Yeah, I didn't. I was in the archives of Jean-Baptiste Colbert, who I will now really, in my new book, Free Market, I say that he actually is really the first person to envision a modern market and to build one in the way that modern states do. And that Adam Smith really didn't understand how markets worked. He understood cooperation, but he thought that nature and farming would be the impetus and morality. That was actually interesting. Smith as a moralist, I'm writing another book about that now. But in the archives of the people that built successful states, and now the British archives I'm seeing, the people that built the modern world, and to be honest, mistakes were made, slavery happened, colonialism, bad things, but also modern functional states giving people personal liberties, prosperity, good dental work, all the things you need in life, okay? That happened by people being accounting visionaries, and I saw that in the archives. I saw Colbert thought the key to his whole project was accounting. Benjamin Franklin thought the same thing. You go into the Spanish archives, these guys were visionary. Juan de Ovando says, this is how we're going to do it. He gets very close to building what will look like the modern state. And he failed. Well, he succeeds, but it doesn't go anywhere. And then because of various politics and religious separations, people don't realize how important this is. The builders of the modern state that we have inherited and that in some ways we're running down today, we're using our political capital. For example, the criticism of the deep state, the criticism of civil servants is the most dangerous thing I've ever seen. The good civil servant, everywhere I go, I can measure a country not only by its account books, but by the quality of its civil servants. I mean, and so the attacks on civil servants are absolutely terrifying. And this is what's happening in the United States. So the archives told me this. And as a historian, I follow the archives. And so in the archives, I found the voices of I would say, visionary people of the past that built tangible things that today we can say were absolutely remarkable achievements. They thought accounting was central to their projects. I mean, and I've given you some of the faces of those people. And there you have Pitt with Price at the moment that Britain will take off. And Pitt realizes that this radical freak is such a brilliant accountant that if he brings him into the state, he can remanage state finances, create a comprehensive balance sheet, and give Britain the advantage, and they do it. It's an incredible story to me. Yeah. And I keep finding these stories. So yeah, that's how I got in as a historian, because I just listened. The people who I'm talking to in the past are some of the greatest minds of all time. I think that's what makes my stories that I tell more compelling. That's the story.
Muito bem, muito obrigado. I would like to conclude inviting you again to a new conference, but in another place, maybe with all the books of our historical archives in Torre do Tombo, because in 2 months we will have all our historical archive in Torre do Tombo.
Yes.
And so I think this is a very, very fantastic place to your next conference, maybe with the team all together.
Yeah.
Towards.
Yeah. By the way, this is an accounting thing. I take this as a contractual offer. I accept. I always accept to come back to Portugal. And I want to see those books. I love the Torre do Tombo anyway, but I want to see those books. And I would like to continue this work that we started so long ago to keep going. One things I learned from the political work is its repetition. If you give up, you don't do it. Politics is really boring. You have to just repeat over and over and over again. And if you meet successful politicians, it's those that have the force. I mean, the successful ones who are good, and some of them are my friends, it's the constant repetition, the repetition, the repetition. And you say, my God, you just achieved something that we discussed 7 years ago. And they go, 7 years, repeating, repeating, repeating. That's the way I think we get to that point.
Okay, thank you very much, dear Jake. All our gratitude to you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Uma salva de palmas para nós.